folks, so this week's topic is going to be close relationships and in particular a focus on romantic relationships. And this video is going to take us all the way to the beginning of that process. In other words, what determines who we actually prefer to have these really close, intimate relationships with? And what factors lead us to be especially likely to feel that kind of spark of attraction with another person? Now, this video is going to touch on some things you're actually not going to find in your textbook. And that's because your textbook focuses a lot on processes related to love and commitment and sex, but it kind of misses out on the fact that all of this good stuff has to actually start somewhere. And in particular, it's likely to start with something like this. Maybe a Tinder profile, maybe meeting somebody in a bar, or seeing somebody from across a room, and having to make that split-second judgment that you actually feel some spark of attraction. You feel some kind of intrigue or interest in that person. And then and only then are you likely to start engaging in the sorts of bonding processes or getting to know you processes that ultimately lead to that long-term love and commitment. So before we get any farther into this video, I want you to actually try to apply this a little bit to your own lives. I'd like you to think about the last time you had a pretty serious crush on someone, if there has been a time like this. And I want you to really try to consider, what factors do you think drew you to this person? Do you think it was mostly about physical appearance? Was it something about their personality? Was it maybe feeling like you had a lot in common or a lot of points of connection? Or are there factors that might have just been random chance, total accident, situational? So take maybe 15, 30 seconds to think this through and come back to the video once you've really marinated on it. All right, so now that you've had a chance to think about your own experiences of attraction, this is what the science has to say. It turns out there are a couple of things that are considered the classical pillars of attraction. These are phenomena that have been studied and have been replicated since we first started studying close relationships in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. These include physical attractiveness, proximity and familiarity, reciprocity, which should be a familiar term by now, and similarity. We're going to examine each of these and the evidence for them in turn. So let's start with physical attractiveness. And we all know this one, right? It is so evident to so many of us that physical attraction is a huge part of love and getting to know other people, that there is an entire reality TV franchise built on the idea of subverting this idea, of taking away that physical attraction component when first meeting other people. And the science really bears this out. It does seem to be the case that looks are one of the most powerful factors in driving attraction to other people. So let's talk about the evidence for this, and then also complexify it a little bit by looking at some other personal qualities that are also really important. So turning to the science, one of the very first studies that was looking at the effect of physical attractiveness in early dating was done in the 1960s, and it's something I'm going to call the computer date study. So basically what these researchers did, team led by Elaine Walster, was they took advantage of the fact that their university had something called a welcome dance at the end of their orientation week. Remember, this is the 1960s, it's all very quaint, right, and wholesome. And what they did was they had some research assistants who actually helped organize and set up this dance. They covertly monitored people as they arrived, took down their names, and rated them quickly for attractiveness, just based off of their superficial appearance. They had also reached out to people who were going to come to the dance, and they had them fill out a bunch of personality questionnaires. They told them that this stuff was all going to be fed into a massive, newfangled computer system, and that they were going to get their optimal match for this dance. They were going to be paired with someone to have a date at this dance. Turns out that wasn't possible at the time. They didn't do this. They just paired people together randomly, aside from the fact that they paired men with women. So they had paired people together, and most people took this pretty seriously. They actually spent this whole welcome dance hanging out with their date, dancing, talking, getting to know each other. And finally, the research assistants took measurements. They had people fill out questionnaires as they left, and they said how attractive they found their date, some other filler questions, and how well they think the date went, right? Whether or not they want to see each other again, whether or not they felt a sense of chemistry. And so this is what they found. Remember that we have two different ratings of how attractive each person was. They were rated by the research assistants, and they were also rated by the person they were on a date with. Now, those research assistant ratings correlated with people's reports of feeling chemistry, feeling actual attraction, pretty well. This was a Pearson's correlation of 0.4. Their own rating of their date being attractive was even more strongly predictive of whether they felt like the date went well, whether they felt like they clicked, whether or not they wanted to see the person again. In fact, this is such a high correlation that we could almost think of these things as just being two sides of the same coin. Saying you find the person physically attractive is almost as good as saying, we had a great time and I want to see them again. So, right, we've just seen physical attractiveness is very important. But do we all agree on what's physically attractive? Is this something that's actually objective? Or is it purely in the eye of the beholder? Well, on some level, I think it's obvious to all of us that there are elements of attractiveness that are situational or cultural that change over time, right? Let's just take a quick tour of changing trends in eyebrow grooming across the last 100 years, where we go from the classic vamp look, where it's basically just a pencil line, to the gloriously kind of bushy, untamed brows of the 1980s, back to overplucking in the 1990s, and finally to the present day, where we have this, very groomed look that people might use 5 different products to achieve. And these are each considered attractive in their own context, right? So obviously, beauty standards change over time. And yet, at the same time, there are certain variables related to beauty that appear to be cross-culturally universal that do not change over time. And these include things like being symmetrical, having big round eyes, smooth, healthy-looking skin, a more baby-faced appearance, right? Connect that back to what we talked about with trustworthiness. For men, in particular, a square jaw. So, that's physical beauty. But is that the only factor that determines whether or not somebody is attractive? It turns out, thankfully, no. So, physical sexiness matters. But so do things like being caring, warm, and dependable, or being smart, ambitious, and successful. And in fact, these 3 overarching qualities are considered to be the heavy hitters by evolutionary psychologists. And this is the taxonomy that they've developed. So they call these 3 categories warmth, loyalty, attractiveness, vitality, and status/resources. Warmth, loyalty is exemplified by things like being a kind person, sensitive, committed, honest, trustworthy. And this is supposed to have evolutionary benefit for pretty obvious reasons. This is someone who is more likely to be capable of listening to your needs, caring for you, and if you have shared children, caring effectively for those kids. And from an evolutionary perspective, if you think about successfully having kids and raising them to adulthood and passing those genes generation to generation to generation, the benefits of this are obvious. Attractiveness, vitality, which includes physical appearance, but also things like being really energetic, athletic, healthy, or passionate. And this is argued to be, from the evolutionary perspective, a marker of good genes and fertility. So if the warmth loyalty is the ability to offer care, the attractiveness vitality is about the quality of the genes you're offering in the first place. Finally, status resources, which this has to do with qualities like being ambitious, intelligent, wealthy, and able to climb up status hierarchies, which is precisely why it's argued to be beneficial. If you have a partner who has high status and lots of resources, they can keep you part of that powerful, central, better protected member of your social group and help you attain and maintain the kinds of resources that you need to survive, right? So all of these together are argued to be evolutionarily beneficial in their own way. So all of that has to do with the qualities, the personal qualities that make someone attractive. The next thing we're going to talk about is much more situational, and this is the effects of proximity and familiarity. One of the most interesting studies, in my opinion, that looked at this is actually from 1932. So this is a sociologist who, this is archival research, he looked at 5,000 marriage licenses in Philadelphia in the early 1930s. And looking at those records, he looked at where each spouse registered themselves as living before they got married. Now remember, this is the 1930s, so probably very few of these people were actually cohabitating before marriage. They would have had their own separate addresses. A full third of people lived within 5 blocks of one another, right? So they're neighbors, basically, getting married. And 12% lived at the same street address. Again, probably not the same apartment, but this would have been apartments within the same building. Pretty crazy. Just to visually give you a sense of what this looks like, this is actually a chunk of Philadelphia, and if this was our lovely bachelorette, there is a 33% chance that her husband would live within that size radius. Pretty crazy. So this is not just something we see in marriage licenses from the 1930s. You also see that students, college students, are overwhelmingly likely to have a best friend who lives in the same dorm that they do. You see that school teachers are much more likely to be friends with people who have a break scheduled at the same time, meaning that they rub shoulders in the lunchroom or the break room. You see that police trainees who have last names that are alphabetically closer, meaning they're probably going to sit closer to each other in an alphabetical seating chart, are more likely to end up being friends. So proximity and just having opportunities for contact and just getting familiar with someone because of their sheer physical presence, that's a powerful force leading you to be more likely to be attracted to someone. Reciprocity. I'm not going to go into detail here because we've already talked about this quite a bit. We know from so many different types of situations that when other people like us, we find that rewarding and flattering and pleasurable. And the same goes for attraction. If you learn that somebody else finds you romantically desirable, there's a chance it will spark your romantic desire for them. And on average, we find those people who are interested in us more interesting and more appealing. So let's talk about similarity, last but not least. And this is actually a controversial one. So I haven't mentioned this, but I study close relationships, and this is actually an area of great interest to me. I'm going to be telling you that your textbook is wrong on this one. So, for a long time, the debate was between people who said that either opposites attract, meaning having different personality characteristics would be complementary and would mean you'd fit well together, or birds of a feather flock together, meaning that the more similar you are, the more on the same wavelength you're likely to be. And so similarity should spark attraction. Turns out that the story has actually changed. The controversy has actually changed in recent years. For a long time, people thought that birds of a feather flock together was the definitive answer to this question. But they came to that consensus using really basic methods and really basic assumptions. In particular, there was this guy named Dunburn who had a long line of research using something called the bogus stranger procedure. What this would mean is you'd come into his lab and he'd ask you questions about yourself, like how you feel about what your habits are, right? What your values are, your feelings on different policies or political positions. And then he would give you a questionnaire that was supposedly filled out by another study participant. And lo and behold, this questionnaire would either match most of your answers, If you think smoking is nasty, this person would think it's nasty too. If you thought money doesn't matter, they also wouldn't care about money. Or you'd see a questionnaire where the person disagrees with you on almost everything. And not shocking whatsoever, people said they'd like the person who had more agreement with them. And that's why we thought birds of a feather flocked together. But it wasn't until 2012 that someone thought to actually test this with two people actually meeting each other. And this was finally done by a woman named Natasha Tidwell, who was a graduate student at Texas A&M University. And she set up a series of speed dating studies with heterosexual undergrads. Round-robin format, meaning that, 11 to 12 guys and 11 to 12 girls would come together and each meet each other for 4 minutes. So before they sat down for the dates, they filled out copious amounts of psychological questionnaires. These were measuring things like their extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, things like their values, their political orientation, their religion, things like how smart, funny, friendly, and charming they said they were. So what this means is for every date that you have, let's say Anna is sitting down with Kendrick. You can look at Anna's extroversion score and Kendrick's extroversion score, and they're going to either be closer together or farther apart, right? They're going to be similar or different. Is it the case that if Anna and Kendrick are similar on lots of things, their extroversion, their self-rated intelligence, their political leanings, are they more attracted to each other? Nope. There was no meaningful relationship for any of these variables in terms of how close together you fell on the spectrum and how likely you were to say you had a lot of chemistry with the person, that you wanted to see them again. It also wasn't the case that being opposite or really different predicted attraction. It just didn't matter. There was no relationship. But what was really interesting is that Natasha Tidwell also asked people to rate how similar they felt they were to the person after talking to them. So let's say you've got Anna and Kendrick, and Anna and Kendrick hit it off. They had a, just lively conversation, rapid fire jokes. They both walked away, buzzing with excitement. They're likely to rate themselves as feeling similar. Anna would perceive herself as being similar to Kendrick. So this might be the reason that we thought similarity led to attraction all along. It was actually the reverse direction. When you like someone and you hit it off, you infer that you have a lot in common, not the other way around. So here's our rundown of the classic pillars of attraction. Physical attractiveness definitely is a big role, but also things like warmth and also things like intelligence and status. The more that you're around someone and see them repeatedly and have opportunities for interaction, the more likely you are to get close to each other, maybe even to form a partnership. We tend to be more attracted to people who signal attraction to us, that's reciprocity, but we're not more likely to be attracted to people who are similar to us. Instead, once we're attracted to other people, we tend to perceive them as being more similar to us. So that's it for initial attraction, and next time we're going to be picking up talking about love. Thanks, folks.